Hello, Professor Kent Lee here. Welcome back to my advanced writing class. In this video, I'm going to go over a couple of exercises in the book that dealt with paraphrasing, summarizing, citing sources, and avoiding plagiarism. I'm going to start with the exercise on page 112 and 113, clear paraphrasing and summarizing. So what I have here are some fairly realistic examples that are from academic authors writing in English as a second language. And so some of the difficulties are due to maybe their own writing style and also language issues. If you compare the original and the revised versions, first of all, you should notice that the revised versions, as I revise them, are better. They flow more smoothly, they flow a little more concisely, a little nicer to read. Why is that? What is different between the original and the revised versions? Well, let's take a look. So if you look at the first one, sample 1, offhand, you'll first notice that I put the author and year, the authors and year in parentheses, rather than mentioning the author's names in the sentence, especially if it's two or more authors. You don't have to do this all the time, but it's just that in this case, I wanted to background the authors. I put it a little bit into the background, because that's not so important, especially if there are a lot of authors. It kind of gets in the way of the flow. So I put that all in parentheses in a parenthetical citation, Seinfeld and Kramer, 2008, rather than mentioning the names of the authors in the sentence, in the main sentence grammar. That kind of backgrounds the authors, and sometimes you can do that. That makes for better flow oftentimes, unless the author is important and you want to highlight the author and such. And then I kind of get right to the point. What did they show? One such study showed a significant impact on self-efficacy for Chinese students. Notice I cut out a lot of minor details. How many students? Where was the study done? What kind of students? That, for the purposes of maybe a literature review, these are, by the way, literature review sections here. For the purpose of a literature review, that's not really so important, unless maybe you want to critique the research methods. If you're a master's student or PhD student and you're planning to do similar research of your own and you want to critique research methods, a lot of the details of the research methods can be left out. You want to get to what's the main point? What did they find? What's their main finding, or the main result, or the main implication, or the main takeaway, the main gist of the paper? Get to that. So I put that first. They showed a significant impact, a little more explanation in the next sentence. There's self-efficacy setting, ratings, improved. Okay, some of the details I put at the end, the kind of rating scale, a quantitative survey that they used. They used like an official quantitative survey that someone else developed. I put that at the end of the section in order to background it more. I could have left it out, actually. I only put it in because, okay, maybe in a graduate level paper or in something published in an academic research journal, maybe that might be worth mentioning. Otherwise, you can leave out minor details if it's not really necessary. And along with that, some of the sources related to that scale could have been left out. But notice I cut out a lot of minor details in citing the study. So I cut 119 words down to about 83 words by removing minor details and putting all the other kind of secondary citations at the end. Those were citations from the Seinfeld and Kramer study that were citations for the quantitative survey scale that they used. They used a scale just developed by some other people. I put that at the end. So that when you're reading that, you can kind of just quickly glance over it and skip it. Or again, I could have cut that out and it would have been even shorter. I've made it more concise. I've shortened it. I've combined sentences and phrases that really highlight the main findings of the key results of the study. Second example, the original is a little wordy. It kind of mentions one study and another study and another study. It's a little redundant. I kind of rearranged things a little bit. Research and picture characteristics indicate blah, blah, blah. Then I put several sources together into one citation. So I've kind of combined things and shortened things. by kind of summarizing in one sentence. I summarized several studies that kind of dealt with some similar ideas, and citations: Ellington 1991, Davis, Coltrane, Brubeck 1993. Okay, these are fictional references, by the way, just for this exercise. And preferable use of photographs, citation. Another study, and I put the authors in parentheses to kind of background them, especially with there's so many authors, so many studies being cited. I just kind of want to hit the highlights of each study. Some details of the study have been left out in the revised version. Minor details are left out. And I've kind of gone through one by one, kind of briefly highlighting the main finding or implication of each study or each group of studies. Another study found this. Okay. Further research on whether such and such reported this too. So I've cut 124 word paragraph back to 107 words. In doing so, I have combined some sentences, and I've created some complex sentences, and that actually can be fine in academic writing because it can make for better flow, especially subordinate clauses can kind of background information that is secondary, like the main clause can present the main ideas, and subordinate clauses can present minor information, like their research methods or something like that. You can use subordinate clauses to background information that is not more important. That gives you a better flow, better coherence. I've also used a lot of complex noun phrases. So for example, and in order to combine sentences. So notice in the original sample 2, features of blah 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 have been explored. Period. For example, comma, Ellington and Davis did this. So and so did this. This sounds really boring. You don't need to all these short, choppy sentences. It makes for kind of poor prose. In mentioning each study in each author, for example, Ellington did this, and Cole did this, and Armstrong did this. It sounds boring. I've combined sentences like research on picture characteristics indicate the importance of One long complex sentence, complex noun phrases allow me to make things actually flow better and make things more concise. Sometimes instead of like a wordy one sentence description of how they did the research, a one complex noun phrase can be better. For example, an interview study, instead of saying we interviewed, they interviewed 200 Chinese students and found that, just say an interview study of Chinese English learners found that. You can replace wordy descriptions of study methods with, more concise phrases. So, things to do here if you're doing a literature review or in any part of your paper when you're citing sources is to cut out excessive background information and wordy summaries when you are citing sources, when you're referring to what other people have thought or said or done. Don't need to give equal importance to all details like so-and-so did this and so-and-so did this. Use some of the backgrounding methods that I mentioned here that you see in the book. Excessive details of the background, the research design, the theoretical assumptions, the statistics, whatever, a lot of those can be left out, and you just want to get to the gist. Avoid excessive and redundant use of reporting expressions, verbs of reporting and communication, like Smith studied this and found blah blah blah. Smith reported blah blah blah, indicated, mentioned. Just say a study by Smith found that. Okay, what's the main point? Cut out some of the excessive reporting expressions. It can be wordy, especially when you're citing a lot of sources. And avoid repeating the same content words. Use more variety. Change some words with synonyms when you can. You can't change really essential keywords in technical terms, but you can change other words with synonyms, combine phrases, combine sentences, use subordinate clauses, and such. And a couple of other methods I'll mention in the next exercise. Okay, next exercise. This is the plagiarism exercise. social science example, education research. What I have here are excerpts from an original text or an original academic research journal article. It's by Guiteau and Dernier, so you see in the footnote on page 115. Guiteau is a French name, Dernier is a Hungarian name. These are both researchers on motivation in second language learning, especially English as a second language, in this case among Koreans. So, example 1a, there's an excerpt from the original article. And this is not the best written article. It's not bad. It's some interesting research, actually. But it's some parts of it are not the best written, like this one. And that comes up in the first student example. So we have, for each excerpt, one or two examples where maybe a student has attempted to cite and use the source in his or her own paper. So student writing sample number 1. Well, the wording sounds very similar. Very similar. It's a copy and paste job. They have not tried to really change much. They have not cited the source. The original source actually had a citation, which also got left out here. And so this is an example of plagiarism. The source is not cited, and the wording is copied and pasted into the student's writing sample, the hypothetical student's writing sample, with minimal changes. And another point is, you shouldn't, whenever you cite sources, you'll focus on the important stuff like the main gist. This is really, some of the information here is not necessary. For example, in the original article, there's a conscious effort to provide equal educational opportunities for secondary school children, and there's a citation for that. Why do you need to cite that? That's so boring. And then this is reproduced in the student writing sample. It's very boring, mundane information. Like, isn't that what schools are supposed to do anyway? Why do you need to cite this? I mean, the original didn't really need to cite a source for that. And the student writing sample doesn't need to reproduce that, repeat that. The next sentence, this could have been paraphrased a lot. And in fact, the second writing sample, 1c, is an appropriate example of paraphrasing and summarizing. Now, paraphrasing and summarizing are two sides of the same coin. When you summarize, you paraphrase. When you paraphrase, you kind of summarize. So I'll use the terms kind of interchangeably. The student rewrote this as, South Korea students are randomly assigned to school, and teachers are rotated, Citation, Guiteau and Dernier, 2008. That's cool. So 1c is appropriate use of the source. Now 2a, here we have a long one, a long excerpt from the original. And the detail here is reflected in the student writing sample in 2b, which itself is kind of long, but notice 4 paragraphs in the original are condensed down to one paragraph. Now, one short paragraph, that's still a bit long for, say, a lit review, where you'd mainly see a long citation, like, multiple sentences like this, a short paragraph, would maybe more likely be in a graduate level paper where you are also critiquing the research methods. And if you're a college student, you would not need to do that. So let's look at the student writing example, 2b. How did they do it? They shortened it a lot. They summarized some details of the research methods. Now, if this were a college paper, all you would have to do is cite the source. You could just say past motivational studies based on, now all you have to do is to say a hybrid observational and interview study by Guiteau and Dernier, 2008, found that, blah, blah, blah. One sentence. Okay, what did they find? Say one sentence. Guiteau and Dernier conducted a study, a hybrid questionnaire and interview study of teachers and students' motivation in an L2 classroom, and found that, blah, blah, blah. And, that could be one or two sentences, maybe one long sentence. You can split it up into 2 sentences or so and report what they found. And that would be fine for a college paper. In this case, there is a more detailed example, a more detailed citation. And let's look at what they did. Notice in the original, the first paragraph, the whole first paragraph, however, these studies, blah, 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 there's a chart at the end of this section that shows the diagrams this. These studies relied on da 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 da. Okay, that whole thing where Goethe and Dunier are critiquing past studies and their shortcomings, that in the student writing sample is condensed to one participle phrase, part of a sentence. Kind of like it's backgrounded kind of like a subordinate clause. Finding past motivational studies based solely on questionnaire survey data inadequate. Okay, that's the whole first paragraph condensed into a participle phrase, finding. It modifies the subject of the main clause that follows Goethe and Dunier 2008. That is condensed and backgrounded into a participle phrase. It's like half of a sentence. A whole paragraph is condensed into one half of a sentence. The whole description of the research methods is reduced to a complex noun phrase, questionnaire data, or studies based on questionnaire data. Very simple, short and simple. Paragraph 2, which talks about part of the research method of Goethe and Dunier, is condensed to another half sentence in the student writing sample. They used a hybrid observational and survey study paradigm research. So sometimes the word paradigm refers to like a research methodology in social sciences. Next paragraph, paragraph 3, much of that is condensed into the next sentence. They observed English classes at a number of secondary schools, coded the teacher and student behavior, and administered questionnaires to the students. So various steps of the research study are condensed to what is called a serial verb phrase, a series of several verbs in one sentence. They observed, blah, 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 coded, blah, 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 and administered, blah, blah, blah. So observed, coded, administered. That's a serial verb phrase. Several verb phrases kind of condensed into one long complex predicate. The next part, the authors deliberated between da 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 and opted for such and such. So that's kind of like paragraphs 4 and 5, or sections 4 and 5 of the original, are condensed to another sentence. Then the last sentence of this paragraph, the student writer injects his or her own evaluation or critique. However, there was no reason both approaches could not have been done for a two-part study, a large-scale study and a smaller, more detailed longitudinal study. So that's intelligent use of sources. The student has kind of commented with his or her own opinion or analysis or critique or suggestion. They didn't have to do it that way. They could have done it like this, and that would have been helpful. So again, you could have a fairly detailed but very, very concise summary like this one, 2B, or again, as I said, if it were just a college paper, a 1 or 2 sentence summary, like Goethe and Dunier conducted a hybrid observational questionnaire study on teachers and students, Korean teachers and students, or teachers and students at a Korean high school, and found that blah blah blah, and found how teachers' student motivation affect learning outcomes. Okay, they could have done that. Next item, example 3A, the original. 3B, the student writing. Wow, they look very similar. The student has copied and pasted. The student did cite the Goethe and Dunier study, yes, but it's a copy and paste job. A few words are changed, a few phrases are changed, but not much. This could have been condensed a lot more. And also notice, the original in number 3 has some citations for recent reviews, see Dunier 2005 and Ushioda in Press. That means an article that's been accepted but it hasn't actually come out yet. That means probably the authors, Goethe and Dunier, know this Ushioda person and got the article from him or her. The student writing sample copies that. It's called a secondary citation, like you say, so for recent reviews, see Dunier 2005 and Ushioda. The student writing sample copies that stuff too. I don't think that the student is claiming, yeah, I also read Dunier 2005, that source. It doesn't look like it. And the student is claiming, by citing Ushioda, is the student is claiming to have read an article that hasn't been published yet. Wow, pretty good for a student, huh? No, that's a copy and paste job, and a professor reading this would go, that looks kind of fishy, looks sort of suspicious. I think the student plagiarized it. And all you need to do is look at the rest of the paragraph and say, yep, the student plagiarized it. In fact, the professor could just type some phrases from this student writing sample into Google and come up with the original and find that the student plagiarized it and go to the student. Don't do it. Example 4, the original. This is a Guillaume and Dernier reporting on their statistical analysis. And then this part might get a little technical for you. And there's some things I'm going to point out that you might not have noticed if you don't know statistics. 4b. It's okay. Used a principal component analysis. Okay, that's a technical term. You can't change that. Which confirmed their prediction. Okay, it's a little boring. It looks kind of similar. They did cut out some of the details, some of the mathematical details that were not necessary. It's okay as a paraphrase. It's not great, but it's okay, I think. I think it could have been shortened a bit more, paraphrased a bit more, though. It does look somewhat similar, and I think some more work would be good here, some more paraphrasing and stuff, and you don't need to, some details like one-factor solution. I mean, if you don't know what that is, leave it out. Don't include stuff if you don't understand it. Your professor might say, oh, that was a nice thing you wrote in the paper about the one-factor solution. Would you like to tell the class about it? Okay, don't do that. It will probably be apparent that you're reproducing contents that you don't understand. Don't put stuff in your paper from sources if you don't understand it. Okay, that will be a red flag that will scream plagiarism, or it will scream information dump, trawling, dumping source information into the paper. And it will probably sound funny in terms of the overall flow of the paper if you're just dumping a lot of information. If you don't understand it, don't put it in your paper. Second example. This is kind of nice. They reported so it's cited, the study is cited based on the findings of a factor analysis. Little problem there, you might not catch this. Factor analysis, it's a related statistical test related to the principal component analysis, but it's not the same. The writer has made a mistake by trying to change the wording, but in this case it doesn't work. It's a technical term, they're not the same. Don't try to change the technical term. It suggests that maybe the writer doesn't quite understand that part. So when you summarize, make sure your summary or your paraphrase is accurate. It's an accurate paraphrase of the contents. And again, focus on the main ideas. Now, this 4C, item 4C, is somewhat of a detailed citation of the excerpt. And it's a generally good paraphrase, except for that one problem with the terminology. However, it goes on, they reported an eigenvalue, it's clear that the student actually does understand this statistical test because the writer is actually critiquing or taking issue with or criticizing the author's interpretation of the statistics. And this shows that the student writer knows his or her stuff. And this is an intelligent comment, an intelligent critique or analysis. It's not something that you would be expected to do necessarily in a college paper, especially this kind of detail. But it's good when you show some original thought as you were citing sources, when you were able to maybe say, wait, but take issue with what the source is saying, what the source is claiming, what the source is reporting, compare sources that present different ideas, contrast and compare them, compare the ideas from the source with your own thoughts that differ, and differ intelligently. Take issue, critique, sometimes intelligently when you can. And that sounds good. Example 5. Here we have in 5b another copy and paste job. Notice all the citations from the original are dumped into the student's writing. It did cite the source, the Guillaume Dernier paper, but it's a copy and paste job, minimal effort at changing the wording. Some things have been changed, but not enough. It's almost as wordy as the original. And all of the sources cited in the original are dumped into the student paper. That looks suspicious, it looks fishy, it looks like the student is claiming, I read all of these sources. No, you didn't. I don't think you did. 5C. Here we have an appropriate example. Past researchers have examined blah blah blah. See Guiteau and Dernier 2008 for references. And that's the original paper for this exercise. See so and so for references. And that's a way of sort of doing a secondary citation, as it's called. See the Guiteau and Dernier paper here and all of their references. Find it for yourself. I'm not going to repeat all those references. I didn't read them. I didn't go to the library or download them. I'm not going to claim that I did. Just go see that paper, the original paper by Guiteau and Dernier, for all of their references. That's a very nice, very concise, succinct, and honest way to say, hey, see that paper. It's got tons of references that are probably relevant to this. Similarly, 5D, the third student writing, past researchers have examined implications, For example, Prophy 2004, that's one of the citations from the original, and others, as cited in Guiteau and Dernier. So as cited in. So the author saying, I didn't read the Prophy 2004 article, it's cited in the Guiteau Dernier article, which I did read. As cited in. That's another way of doing a secondary reference. Maybe I didn't read the Prophy source, maybe I can't get it for some reason, it's not available, but I know about it because these people cited it. Guiteau and Dernier cited it, and I'm citing Guiteau and Dernier, who cited the Prophy. And in your in references or such, I think you would just put the Guiteau and Dernier because you didn't actually directly get the Prophy source. So notice there's like no set standard for how much paraphrasing you're supposed to do, like you need to change 52.8% of the words or something like that. It really depends on the kind of sources you're dealing with and the kind of writing that you're doing. In this cases, we've got some fairly detailed summaries sometimes, but often fairly concise and short paraphrases that are nice, short, sweet, and simple. And especially for college papers, that's more likely what you're going to do, where you cite a source and your summary of that source is maybe a sentence, or maybe half a sentence, maybe two sentences, or more, especially if it's an important source. Maybe several sentences if it's an really important source for your ideas, the thesis of your paper. So, also take a look at this chart at the end of the section. All right. Those are some things that you should be aware of in paraphrasing and properly citing sources. And of course, at the end of your paper, your college papers, you should have a complete list of references. It might be called in references, like in APA and social science papers. It might be called works cited in humanities fields, especially if you're using MLA or Chicago format. Whatever it's called. You should have in your in references every source that you cited in your paper, and only sources that you cited in your paper. Don't decorate it with other sources that you did not actually read and cite in your paper. And ideally, it should be sources that you actually read, or at least you read enough that you've got the gist. You understand the gist enough that you can write about it intelligently. Okay, that's it for now. So I hope this helps you. So good luck on your papers, good luck on your academic writing, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.